Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe, Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock here to start you off. Recording this on Wednesday. It's about 4:20 when we're recording this, so who knows what's going to happen, especially in coaching search. Mary Kay still has her coaching search tree behind her. I feel like we need to switch the ornaments. Every time a new name comes up, we should have like an ornament of that person to put on the tree. And we can put John Harbaugh as the star on top, maybe something like that.
I love it.
We're gonna get into a little bit of this coaching search and where things stand as of recording this. Then Lance Reisland is going to join the show. He'll look back on that Bengals game, and I know Lance really likes Todd Monken. Like, he really liked him as a coordinator, so maybe I'll throw some Todd Monken questions at Lance as well, since he has been requested by the Browns to get interviewed. So, Mary Kay, look, Thursday is going to be an interesting day in Berea. It is coordinator day. It's usually coordinator day for us. That was usually when we got to talk to the coordinators. Andrew Berry and the coaching search committee are going to get to talk to the coordinators tomorrow, both Jim Schwartz and Tommy Rees. We've talked about both of these guys as potential candidates. And I actually think I want to start with Tommy here because of the two, he'd be the most surprising. Now, we've thrown his name out there as a possibility. We've thrown it out there that maybe he could just blow them away and get this job. Who knows? And he's had opportunities in college. We know what they think of him. They don't want to let him leave the building. So I don't know. Is it that wild to think that Tommy Rees could have a shot to get this job if this interview goes well on Thursday?
No, I don't think it would be the craziest thing in the world. I've actually talked to people just even today that have extolled again the virtues of Tommy Rees and just how he is an offensive savant and how great he is going to be. And everybody that I ever talked to about Tommy, they tell me that he is definitely going to be an NFL head coach someday. And if you know that you've got somebody like that in the building, you don't want to let him walk out the building. They've let a number of guys like that go. They've let Kevin O'Connell get away. They let Kyle Shanahan get away. And Tommy falls in that camp as far as I can tell with the people that I have talked to. We know that he is extremely highly endorsed by Nick Saban, and Nick obviously knows what he's talking about, and he worked with Tommy for a year. And then to hear all of the other Browns assistants talk about Tommy, he's this 33-year-old young man, and they rave about him. I mean, they have him up on a pedestal, just in terms of what he can do and how he just can command the room and how players respond to him and all of those kinds of things. So I think that Tommy has a chance to knock this interview out of the park. But the thing to remember about Tommy is that he's only been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. He has only called plays for half the year. And it's going to come down to, do they feel that he's ready for this opportunity? Do they feel that he's ready for that, or if he's not? Now, if they feel that he's not, they run the risk of losing him. And so they're going to have to weigh that against his readiness to be a head coach. And I will probably end up writing something along these lines today or tomorrow. But I think that is the risk with the Tommy Rees interview is, you might either have to hire him as your head coach or run the risk of losing him. Now, maybe if Jim Schwartz gets the head job, maybe he wants to keep Tommy Rees, and maybe Tommy Rees wants to stay. But we'll have to see how that goes, because I do think there's a world in which Tommy Rees will have other opportunities. What if Kevin Stefanski gets a head coaching job and wants to hire away Tommy Rees? So there are all different kinds of things that can happen here. And again, as you mentioned, Dan, it's going to be a very, very interesting day in Berea tomorrow when they interview both of these coordinators.
Yes. Ashley, to Mary Kay's point, you mentioned 33 years old. And, I'm just thinking about some of the guys who did talk about him as that season was going along, as we got a chance to talk to some of these other assistant coaches who were working under him, like Chad O'Shea, who's been in this business forever and worked under Bill Belichick and worked with Josh McDaniels and has been a coordinator himself and a play caller himself. Bill Musgrave, right? We don't need to lay out his resume. He's been around forever and knows what he's talking about and has worked with great coaches. All of these guys, and there's others too, but these guys all had such impressive things to say about Tommy, to the point where, you're always kind of trying to parse, well, is a guy just saying something because he's behind a microphone, or like, man, he's really praising this guy. He's really saying some meaningful stuff. And I felt like they were saying some meaningful stuff about him. You'd be getting in on the ground floor. There'd be some growing pains. I bet the Rams would admit there were growing pains with Sean McVay. Obviously he was very good from the start, but he's had to kind of learn how to be a head coach in this league on the fly a little bit when he got hired so young. So you're sort of trying to project, if you hire Tommy Rees, not just what he can be in 2026, but what he can be in 2030 and down the road here. And I think that's what makes it interesting.
I do too. And look, I think that Sean McVay model has become so alluring to so many teams. You get that young guy that has this really cutting edge feel for the game. And look, I think Tommy, the biggest knock on him is what Mary Kay mentioned with the play calling, right? Like he's only called plays for half a season. But if he knocks that interview out of the park and they feel really strongly about him and players already like him, and even like before Tommy Rees was offensive coordinator, when he was still coaching the tight ends last year, people like Chad O'Shea were still like obviously thinking so highly of him, right? So I don't think any of that is just because he's the coordinator this year and people are in front of a microphone and they're talking about him. Like we know for a couple years how strongly people in that building have felt about Tommy Rees. So the experience factor, like it's something you have to consider. And like Mary Kay said, I think this weighing of, are you okay with losing him or can you absolutely not? Because I think you have to look at, if you hire somebody else, a different offensive mind, like the chance of losing him is fairly high, right? Like you have to kind of acknowledge that. And he's a guy who you've seen that steam game sort of gaining at the college level, each hiring cycle for those spots. So it's going to be fascinating to kind of see how his star continues to rise. And if ultimately, if he does go elsewhere, is he one of those guys that Browns fans are going to look back on and be like, oh, I can't believe we let that guy get out of this building?
Yeah, I mean, Mary Kay, when I think about, just kind of thinking back to the early days of McVay, and again, look, he got to a Super Bowl. I'm not saying Tommy Rees is going to be Sean McVay, but this is the model they're trying to follow. This is the type of coach they're hoping to unearth if they hire him. I don't know that he'll ever be. I mean, Sean McVay might be the best coach in football right now, so I don't know that he'd ever get to that level. But yeah, I remember those early days in LA. There would be games where the defense would be on the field and Sean would be like sitting on a water cooler, even though he was the head coach, looking at the iPad or whatever. So again, there were some growing pains with him, even though he had a lot of success early. And I guess the question for the Browns would be, would they be willing to deal with some growing pains with Tommy? Like, can they stomach, especially if you're bringing in a young quarterback, you already have a young football team. Would they also be willing to kind of stomach some growing pains with Tommy Rees kind of taking on what it is to be a head coach, if that's the direction that they went? Because even as prepared as he might be, that's a hard job to get thrown into it. He'll be 34 by the time next season starts. That's a tough job to get thrown into at that age.
Yeah, I think it would be one of those hires that would be outside of the box, right? It's not what everybody does. You don't necessarily hire someone that just started calling plays and has only called them for whatever it was, 7 or 8 games. So that's not something that you normally do, but I think he's different. I think he is different. I've talked to enough people over the years about enough assistant coaches, about enough rising stars in this business to know when you're hearing about someone who's different and special. And that's what it's like with Tommy. I mean, I haven't heard people talk like this about hardly anybody over the years, really, in these glowing terms. And so I do think that they have to think long and hard about letting him get away, because he might represent the long-term future of your organization in terms of quarterback development and offensive innovation and all of those kinds of things. And that's what this team needs right now. That's what this team needs. It needs an offensive overhaul. It really does. And I think that Tommy has a real opportunity here. I think he's got a real opportunity to go in there and knock their socks off and really sell himself and come out really strong in this competition because he's got a lot of great credentials. And once again, I do think that he can be talked about in the same way that we talk about a Sean McVay, a Kevin O'Connell. And here's another one, a Mike McDaniel, because Andrew values those brilliant offensive minds. He really values that. And I do think he would be interested in Mike McDaniel if he became available. It doesn't sound like that's going to happen right now. But I do think he would be interested in him. And I think Tommy is in that mold. And so they're going to have to figure out the best way to go about all of this. If they decide they want to keep Jim Schwartz and they want to keep Tommy Rees, they're going to have to work through how they can do that. How can they do that? And I think there is a way to do that, but I'm not sure yet exactly how you would play that all out.
Now, I should mention that when I mentioned Sean McVay's growing pains, those growing pains came with an 11-5 record and a 13-3 record in his first 2 seasons and a Super Bowl appearance. So those growing pains are a little bit easier to live with when you're getting those sorts of results. And one of the more interesting things too is, they really supported him with a strong head coach style defensive coordinator in Wade Phillips. So for those early years, he was very much like running the offense and Wade Phillips was running the defense. And the thing that has changed with him is he's kind of running the whole operation now. So that's sort of the approach you would have to take, which is interesting. We'll talk about Jim Schwartz here in a second. But Ashley, the other thing that stood out to me while Mary Kay was talking is the Browns want an offensive overhaul. And that puts Tommy in an interesting position where he kind of he's associated with where this offense was. So he's got to kind of talk about how he wants to change sort of, I guess, what he was doing, what they were doing. Like he almost has to separate himself a little bit from what they did this year, or while kind of trying to pitch himself as the answer for this offense.
He does. And, I'm reminded of that Andrew Berry quote on Monday, where he said Bill Polian, one of his oldest advisors, obviously, says that being a head coach in the NFL is a lot like running for office or running for governor, right? And I think in this way, this is very political, what Tommy is going to have to do in this interview. You see politicians do this a lot, where you kind of separate yourself from the past and talk about what you would want to change while still needing your past, obviously, as your experience, part of your resume to vouch for you in that way. So it's an interesting line that Tommy is going to have to walk. I don't think it's impossible. And I think the other thing he has to fall back on is something else Andrew Berry kept repeating, which is acknowledging that their roster offensively was limited and saying they're going to have to devote a lot of resources to really shoring up that side of the ball. So if you have a vision for what you need, what you want to do different, the kinds of players you need in order to make that happen, and it vibes with what this committee is also thinking, then it could make for, I think, like what would be viewed as a bit of an unexpected move from the outside looking in, and maybe people who aren't as familiar with Tommy Rees.
And I think the big thing is, like, look, if he blows it away in that interview tomorrow and then shows you can't be scared. You can't be scared to make that move just because he's 33 years old, and it would be that outside of the box move. And I think we know Andrew certainly wouldn't ever be scared to do something like that. So again, very interesting. Now, of course, I mean, if we were putting odds on these two guys to get the job, I think Jim Schwartz would be the more likely candidate. So let's talk a little bit about that, Mary Kay. A number of defensive players, including Myles Garrett, have endorsed Jim Schwartz as a potential candidate. They love playing for the guy. For Jim, this represents kind of an opportunity that he might not get otherwise. And I don't know how many more shots he's going to get at this. So tomorrow might be a very big day in Jim Schwartz's career. I guess as this is all playing out and as we're seeing these requests come in, and there's still going to be more coming. And obviously there's teams in the playoffs that they have to wait on some guys for and things like that. Where do you think Jim Schwartz is in the pecking order right now as far as his chance to maybe get this job?
I think he's got to be pretty high up. They absolutely love Jim Schwartz in that building. Everyone does. Even Kevin Stefanski absolutely praised him on his way out the door. All of the players have been raving and gushing about him this week. So they know that it would be a feel-good thing inside the building. I think they just have to decide, do they want more of an offensive minded head coach that can help transform that side of the ball and leave Jim at his area of strength on the defensive side of the ball. These are some things that they're going to have to weigh. Now, they don't seem to care if they have an offensive guy or a defensive guy as the head coach. As long as they feel as though they have two really strong coordinators, I think they're totally fine. They want a leader of men. They want someone who can lead this football team and take it to the next level. And I think Jim has those traits and those qualities. So if it were Jim and a really strong offensive coordinator, and then he can promote one of his defensive guys to help keep things chugging along on defense, then I think it can work. So that's one of the things that they're going to have to figure out is how they would put this puzzle together and how it would best work. But in terms of leader of men, and as Miles described, regimented, and the trains get out on time and all those kinds of things, and just the discipline and, the people skills, he definitely has all of that in spades.
Well, look, if there's ever a year to make the case to hire a defensive guy, the AFC playoff picture, you've got New England with Vrabel, you've got Pittsburgh with Tomlin, Houston with Ryans, Buffalo with McDermott. There's some defensive coaches. Of course, the number one seed over in the NFC is Mike McDonald. So like there are certainly some defensive coaches that have put themselves, that have kind of shown you it's possible to be a really good football team, even if you don't have that offensive mastermind, in the very top job. Ashley, I know you put up a story on what some players said on Locker Cleanout Day. Again, Myles Garrett was, gave a very, as far as Myles Garrett goes, gave a very strong endorsement to Jim Schwartz on the same day that he did not give a very strong endorsement to Kevin Stefanski. So, it seems you can't just do what the players want, but at the very least, it would be a popular move in that locker room if that's the direction they want.
It would be. I think it's one that the fan base would also largely embrace right now, because the fan base has seen up close and personal how good this defense has looked. Now, I say that, but I'll be curious to see, obviously, if the Browns don't get John Harbaugh, and the fans will probably be mad about that, and whatever. But that's a separate conversation. I think the other part and the point of the story I wrote today is also just like all these other defensive coordinator names floating around. A lot of their defenses are very different from Jim Schwartz's. Like, we've talked about that. Jim Schwartz is kind of a dying breed. There are a few teams that do things similarly. Robert Saleh in San Francisco is one of the guys who runs a similar system to what Jim does, and players have talked about that before. But that's what's interesting. And I think that's a big part of why these guys are so ready to endorse Jim Schwartz. I do think they really like him, obviously, right? But Denzel Ward, Grant Delpit, and Myles Garrett also know they've had unprecedented success individually and as a team in this system. The Browns don't run two high safety looks. They typically have that one high, like Grant Delpit pointed out on Monday. Obviously, like the 5 or 6 down linemen in certain packages. Jim doesn't blitz as often. They don't do a lot of disguising zone. They're more about disguising their man looks. So it would be different, I think, where I'm sitting at right now from the outside looking in. I know they say they don't want to get caught up in too much of a scheme, but they've had so much success in this scheme, which Andrew Berry has acknowledged. I don't know why you would hire a defensive coach that runs something totally unlike what Jim Schwartz does. That's to me where it's like, what is happening? Why would you do that? And maybe they will, and maybe they'll have a really good reason. Maybe it will make sense, but I think that is just an interesting note in all of this in terms of why the players like him so much. Like, Myles Garrett's on his way to winning his second NFL Defensive Player of the Year award and just broke the single season sack record. Of course he's going to want to keep Jim Schwartz here. That's kind of, it just makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's when guys have individual success, they really like their coach. That's sometimes how it can work. But let's talk about one more name. This one is interesting. Dan Pitcher, who started in Indianapolis working with Andrew Berry on the scouting side of things. Then he ends up going to Cincinnati. He moves over to the coaching side. kind of similar in some ways to Kevin Stefanski in that he survived a coaching change. So he started under Marvin Lewis and ends up working under Zach Taylor. He's been on that. He actually replaced Alex Van Pelt when Alex left Cincinnati to join the Browns. So as the quarterback's coach. So this is one of those offensive minds, Mary Kay, a young offensive mind. And of course, that relationship with Andrew Berry is interesting because that was one of Andrew's big talking points on Monday was that relationship between the coach and the GM and how important it is that these guys are on the same page because they've got to go to battle together and they've got to have each other's backs. So a familiar face that Andrew knows coming into that building to interview a young guy, an offensive guy who's worked for, when they're healthy, a team that has been one of the best passing offenses in football, that makes him interesting.
Yeah, and if he can bring Joe Burrow here,
Yeah, that would
be
help
even
as well.
more interesting, wouldn't it?
And Jamar Chase and T. Higgins.
Exactly. Joe Burrow loves Dan Pitcher. He absolutely loves him. He's had some of his, of course, best seasons with Dan Pitcher there, either as assistant quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinator. And we all know how amazing Joe Burrow is. He loves this guy. And as you mentioned, and I tweeted, when I quote tweeted my story about this with that quote from Andrew Berry saying that this has to be like a marriage. And so he is looking for someone that he can be in lockstep with, someone that he has that simpatico with, and he can really put their heads together and do some amazing things for the direction and the guidance of this football team. And it seems like he probably naturally has that for Dan Pitcher. I'm not sure if he's the one that hired him as the scouting assistant. Andrew was there with the Colts at the time that Dan Pitcher was hired, and Andrew was the pro scouting coordinator. So there's a good chance that he brought Dan Pitcher in as that scouting assistant. And if he didn't, then he was part of it. And he was probably also part of promoting him to a pro scout. So Andrew is well-versed in all things Dan Pitcher. He knows how his mind works. And he's another one of these brilliant offensive guys. He's just really super smart, and he would be an amazing play caller. And it would be an interesting hire. Now, sometimes you hire guys to kind of pick their brains and get them in the pipeline a little bit. You might not think they're 100% ready to be a head coach. And in those instances, that coach is going to have to come in and 100% nail that interview to prove to you that he can get the job done. Because sometimes what you're doing is bringing someone in to find out about as much about them as you possibly can, to see where they're at, to see if someday maybe they do become your head coach if it's not this year. Or if things don't work out, maybe they become your offensive coordinator or whatever the case may be. So maybe he's not 100% ready yet, but I do think he has the opportunity to really impress Andrew Berry, who is driving the bus on this coaching search. They have a history, and he's got some amazing, amazing credentials.
Yeah, and especially in these early stages, it is that opportunity to get some guys in, get to know some guys, or reconnect with guys in this case, and sort of see. You do get to sit, to your point, you get to sit there and pick their brains, and they're presenting to you all their football ideas, how they'd run a team, all of that stuff, and maybe at some point you revisit that. It's almost like the draft process in some ways too, right? You just bring guys in. And maybe you don't draft them, but you do all this work on them and you get familiar with them. And then 4 years later, they're available and you sign them because you really like them. So that's a part of this too, Ashley. And maybe Dan Pitcher fits in that mold, or maybe just like Tommy Rees, he comes in and blows the Browns away and he gets a second interview. And 3 weeks from now, we're getting introduced to Dan Pitcher at Huntington Bank Field as the next head coach of the Browns. With Andrew Berry, I think anything is possible.
Anything is possible. And the one thing we know about Andrew Berry, I think, is when he has a relationship with somebody and likes them, he will keep going back to that same well, right? He's a big part of why Jim Schwartz is back here at all in a coordinator seat again, and their connection they had in Philly. And I mean, we see it with his draft picks. We joked all the time about how hesitant he has been historically to let go of those guys he drafts. Like you look at obviously a guy like David Njoku, you look at a guy like Jerry Jeudy, but it goes for these people that he's worked with in the league, right? Catherine Hickman, formerly Catherine Reich, like they worked together in Philly. We've talked about that. He will keep going back to people who have shown him something over time. So if he ultimately hires somebody that it's somebody that people weren't expecting, but there's some sort of long-standing history there, it starts to make more sense because that is largely how he's operated. I think he really values those relationships, and when he sees something he likes in somebody, he doesn't forget it very easily.
Okay, there we go. Our updated coaching search. It's 4:45 right now, so if we forget some names that pop up on what is today? I honestly, I've lost track of days. I even said it earlier. It's Wednesday. If there's some guys that pop up on Wednesday night, we will get to them when we record again on Thursday. Just get subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Our YouTube channel is Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com, and you'll get to hear us talk about all these candidates at some point as we go along. Right now, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, Lance Reisland is going to join us for his weekly look back at the film from Sunday. Welcome back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, and we welcome on now Lance Reisland. Lance, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Dan. How are you tonight, buddy?
Doing well. We are into off-season mode. I recorded with Ashley and Mary Kay not that long ago, and I could not remember what day it was because I'm so used to like, okay, Wednesday is this day in Berea, and Thursday is this day in Berea. And now it's just sort of all, I'm thrown off because we were there on Monday for the presser. I'm a mess right now. So even though there's a lot going on, I can't keep track of my days.
There's no question. I was the same boat. We're on Tuesday nights, and I was all messed up when I got home today. I'm thinking, what day is it? I'm with you. Because our season schedules are pretty set and kind of set what they are. So
yeah,
get thrown off, it's not fun.
Football is very regimented, and
love it.
Then you get into this off season and you lose some of that. So anyway, before we get to some stuff I want to ask you about coaching wise, I do want to spend a little bit of time on this game on Sunday. I'm just going to open this up for you. What was your big kind of take? Because I'll be honest with you, I have not had a chance to rewatch that game, so it was just my initial viewing sitting there at Paycor Stadium. What was your big takeaway from that game?
Well, the first thing you saw was great effort, and you saw not only great effort because these guys are pros, but I saw a scouting report kind of come into fruition. Right, that you could tell they prepared for the game. I guess is an easy way to say it for fans. So, they were prepared. They were prepared what the Bengals were going to do. I thought the defense played outstanding again. I thought Shedeur Sanders played pretty poorly, if you want to know the truth. But what I liked was that last drive, and you hear me say it all the time, impact plays or plays that when they're presented to you is what I always say. And, that last drive, I think one of his best drives, best throws of the year was the 3rd down and 10 from his own 29-yard line. He hits that 13-yard out to Isaiah Bond. And what I liked about that was because it kind of came all for, everything that he's, you and I have talked about he had to do. They switched coverage from pre to post snap, which made the comeback open. They were actually in a kind of a tricky cover 6 special where they were cover 2 on one side and man on the other side, and he read it. Then he stepped up in the pocket really, really well, and he delivered a strike in a high-pressure situation. I thought that was really, really important that he did that. And then one of the things I liked on that drive, instead of trying to hit a home run, he hit Sampson on a swing route on 2nd and 10, which makes it 3rd down and 1. Now, what I tell everybody, what's really important about that is that when he threw the next one to Jerry Jeudy over the middle before the field goal, they were in regular personnel. And the reason they were in regular personnel is because it was 3rd down and 1 and not 3rd down and 10. So those those things for me kind of stick out when you talk about quarterback play because he didn't play very well all day. And, he still made some impact throws at the end of the game. So I thought that was really good. But more than anything, both sides of the ball, I thought the effort was great and they were ready to play, which is a big thing. When you're not winning like you want to.
In a lot of ways, that game to me sums up sort of the 7 starts of Shedeur Sanders. Because you're right, he didn't play well for a lot of that game. There were some, he probably should have been picked off a couple of times. There were some, what is he looking at here moments, but then there were also some really good, like, man, is there some way to just capture this? You mentioned the 2-minute drive and his approach on that drive to set up the field goal. That throw to Sal Cannella that Cannella dropped was a beautiful throw, right? Maybe Harold Fanning catches that. I don't know. I don't know if David Njoku can run that far anymore, but maybe David Njoku catches that. But there are these little moments, right? There's these little like capsules of time that we can point at and say, man, it just feels like there's something there. But then it's just not consistent enough. And that's why you see all these charts floating around Twitter, and you see obviously the stats were not great, all of that. That kind of frame his performance as not being very good, but there are still just these really enticing moments.
Well, the thing that, and you hear me say this all the time, winning is important. So that's got to be involved in that as well. And as bad as as he played, he made impactful throws at the end. And it's just like if he had played great for 3 quarters and then played terrible on the last drive to win it. You got to pick and choose. You can't be great at all the time. It's like going back to the Vikings game. The defense had a chance to win that game to stop Carson Wentz from going 80-plus yards. You take that every time, right? You put your field goal kicker in week 1. You put him in a position to win. There's things that you do as a football coach that I thought they did very well. And as a quarterback, I think he, once again, to not play well and then to bounce back and not have a lot of weapons around him. Once again, I think he is intriguing. And there's so many holes on this offense. And I'm elbow deep now into quarterbacks and receivers and tackles right now in the draft. And I'm not sure if there's a guy out there that you say, you know what, I want to give the guy these keys right now, especially when you don't have tackles and you don't have great skill. So I don't know. I think he's absolutely put himself in the conversation. And I'm going to say this too, because I'm going to say it all offseason. I still think Dylan Gabriel will put up a fight as well, because you never know who's, I tell everybody with new coaches come new expectations, and a lot of times change. So we'll see what happens moving forward.
Well, we're doing a little draft later. We'll get into a little bit, a storyline from this season that I think applies to this Browns football team. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So let me get into some coaching stuff here. And first of all, just overall, before we kind of get into some of the names that are out there, your thoughts on the decision to fire Kevin?
Well, I understand it. I didn't really like it. I wanted to be on record saying, I thought it should be everybody or nobody. I was reading what you wrote this week about, Andrew Berry, and there's a lot to be said about that offensive line that's really expensive and old, and lack of receivers and lack of going out and getting receiver help. You and I have Mary Kay and Ashley. We've done a lot of podcasts where we talk about, man, we need a guy who can get some easy yards. And we need to, we've been saying that for a number of years. So I thought everybody had their hand in it. I thought everybody had their hand in the pot of futility, is like I like to say. And my dad used to always say, in football, everybody has their hand in it. And that's kind of the thing with Dylan and Shador, where they did well, where they did bad. Everything kind of rolled back on Kevin. And that's that's what you sign up for as a head coach. And I understand you didn't win enough, and that's the idea, and that's what happens in the NFL. But I'm worried, I'm not gonna say worried, but I'm concerned about when Andrew Berry's picking it, that they're not a yes guy, but a guy who follows what they believe in, which is teach his own. But they're not really football guys, really, right? They're numbers and analytics guys per se. So, I wasn't very happy. I like Kevin. He's super nice. He doesn't always give you guys the answers you want, but I like the fact that he owns everything. And he never puts anybody, and so many times he could have done that, and he refuses to do it. And I appreciate that of him, because when people want to know why he's going to be a head coach really quick, those little things that no one talks about. Unfortunately, that's how owners work. He's very calm under pressure. He's had success, whether it's been lately or not. So he'll get hired quickly, and a lot has to do with his personality. I was really sad to see him go, but I understand.
So I want to talk about some of the names that have come out kind of early in this coaching search. And obviously we're still so, it's still so early. Who knows who's going to kind of separate themselves and move to the front of the pack here. And obviously that won't be all up to who the Browns want. There's a lot of teams looking for coaches, but when they requested one name, you were the first guy that popped into my head, because you have praised this guy effusively for what he's done in Baltimore. And I'm not talking about John Harbaugh, although obviously I'm sure you love him too. I'm talking about Todd Monken, the OC there. So the Browns put in a request to interview Todd Monken. And I know that's a guy you really like. So tell me what it is you like about him as an offensive coordinator.
Well, this is going to sound really silly, but I've said this before, but he is Jim Schwartz on the offensive side of the ball. And it really starts with finding players. It's not about his scheme. So when you think about what he's done against the Browns are a attacking defense. And starting 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago when he got the job, he has taken that Ravens offense, and they've done things to trap and crunch and counter and kind of let that defensive line kind of come upfield. Then he's found matchups in the pass game against linebackers and safeties, using motions, formations, shifts, personnel groups to kind of get the matchups he wants. So for him, obviously the schemes are all very similar, right? He runs zone, he runs counter. He's varied. He was also very good at Georgia. Back in the day, I loved what he did at Georgia, that schematic thing. So he's a guy who's very multiple. He's very flexible, but what I like most about him, Dan, is that he is all about players. So if you got a good player, he's going to touch it a bunch. And I think that's so important this day and age. To this, I've never understood at any level of football. I was never an outstanding offensive coordinator, but over the course of doing it for more than 2 decades, one thing that always happened, win, lose, or draw, my best guys touched it. And in the NFL, there's nothing worse when guys come in and go, such and such only had 2 targets in the first half. It makes no sense to me. So you won't get that with Todd Monken. That's the reason I love him, is because he's all about getting his Zay Flowers and Andrews in the red zone and likely against safeties and Lamar Jackson in the run game. He's so innovative what he does to find ways to get his best players to football. So if you like what Schwartz does on defense, this is kind of the offensive version of that, where I'm going to create great matchups for my guys, keep it simple, and let everybody play fast.
So I'm going to throw a few more names at you that have come out. And, we talked a little bit about the 2 coordinators, since they're going to interview on Thursday in the first part of the pod. And let's talk Jim Schwartz. Look, it didn't work out for him in Detroit over a decade ago when he was a head coach there. I'm always fascinated by guys that kind of not go away, but they aren't head coaches, and then they kind of maybe get an opportunity to do it again. What do they learn in that gap of time? How do they change? How do you view Schwartz as a head coach candidate?
Well, I'm going to be totally selfish here. I like Jim Schwartz as a coordinator, and here's why. I love him as a head coach, but this goes back to a number of people that I'm close with in my life at the high school and college level. So many times we get hired for the things we do on one side of the football, we become the head coach. And when we become a head coach, there's a bunch of other CEO things that are involved with that. And a lot of us I like to think of Jim Schwartz as a football dude. And I consider myself a football guy. Like, I like to watch football for fun. That's what my hobby is. I don't do a lot else. And I really, people say, how much film do you watch? As much as I can. And that's kind of how I've always felt about like Jim Schwartz and these guys. And sometimes when you become a head coach, those CEO responsibilities start to take over. So even if he is the head coach, the defense won't be the same, because most likely he won't be calling it. Now, his organizational skills, his alpha ability, mentality, all those things will be outstanding. I do think he would be an outstanding head coach, but I think he's a better coordinator. And what I mean by that is I think he's in the top, 2 to 3 coordinators in the league, and will continue to be that way because first of all, he has great players on his side of the ball, and his scheme really matches it. So there's a lot of guys right now that are hoping he's being the defensive coordinator again, because their skill set fits this and not a ton of other defenses in the league. But again, Dan, I think he'd be great discipline-wise, but I'm selfish. I want that guy calling my defense.
That's what I think is fascinating, and something we have talked about is that this defense is unique, and they have spent years kind of building into this defense. And we've talked about that with like what's made Pittsburgh so successful, what's made Baltimore so successful. It's knowing what you're drafting for. It's knowing what you're signing for. And at least on the defensive side of the ball, the Browns have kind of found that. And you can't just go out and hire another guy that's going to run this system. There aren't a lot of guys out there that run this system right now. This league is a very too high league that takes away deep balls and things like that. And that's just not how the Browns play.
Well, yeah. So all of a sudden, let's say he's not the defensive coordinator. Guys who've had career years, a guy like Malik Collins, always been disruptive, but super disruptive in this set, right? You got a guy like Devin Bush. Gets to play downhill. I steal that from you all the time, covering kicks, right? Because that's really what these linebackers are doing. They're cleaning up what the defensive line leaves left. He's been awesome because of that. You think of Grant Delpit down in the box. He's not a great half safety, but what he is a playmaker. So what do you do with Grant Delpit if he has to be a too high guy all the time? A guy like Tyson Campbell they brought in. The reason he's better than Newsome and Fitz is because he's better in man. He also is a good run fit guy. If he gets caught, away from a twins where he's on a tight end and they run to the tight end, he showed his toughness. So there's a lot of guys who had career years defensively. Not only did they play well, and he allows them to play fast, but the scheme fits them, right? And that's the key to this Brown scheme. So a lot of these guys that had career years, I tell everything. One of the most disappointing things about Kevin Stefanski getting fired is most likely the defense took a huge hit. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, because new coaches do their own thing, and that's how coaching works. And most likely the defense that we've known from Cleveland, unless he becomes the head coach or unless Tommy Rees becomes the head coach and keeps him, then, you most likely have seen this dominant front, aggressive front. And Dan, you said it best, because it's a too high league, it becomes very difficult to prepare for the Browns in a 3-day, collective bargaining, 3 days of practice. It's hard to prepare for this pressure front.
So you mentioned that name, Tommy Rees, and he's going to interview for this job. And that's an interesting one. Obviously a really young guy. I keep making this comparison. I do this carefully. Again, I'll preface this. You would be trying to bank on finding the next Sean McVay. Now, Sean McVay is maybe the best coach in the NFL. So again, I am not saying Tommy Rees is going to be that. But that's what you're hoping to find is this young upcoming guy. You're banking on upside. You're hiring him as much for what he's going to be in 2028 as what he's going to be in 2026. But with Tommy, how would you feel if that was the direction the Browns went? And I think I would be surprised if that happened. But if it did, how would you feel about him?
Well, he is a really good offensive mind. Going back to his Notre Dame days, he learned a lot from Brian Kelly. He learned a lot from Nick Saban. So he's very well versed in multiple tight ends, very pro style underneath center in the gun. So he gives you that. Now, when you think about Sean McVay, he's been very innovative with space, motion, and tempo, right? Those are the things he's really created differently. Him, Mike McDaniel, these guys, they have been the masters of this new wave. So everything kind of is reciprocal. So the idea of him coming back is kind of like the Browns defense. He would kind of bring back this power run game that I think the Browns would be very, very good at. The problem is for me is that if Tommy Rees is the head coach, is it because they wanted to keep Jim Schwartz? And I say this, I don't say yes man sounds kind of negative. It's kind of like a game manager for some reason. I don't mean that if they hired Tommy Rees, he couldn't do whatever he wanted. It means he aligns with Andrew Berry. And for me, I've had a lot of people who've said, I'm going to show you proof. Well, I just know what I see. And so many things are based on numbers and what's on the chart and how we do things and the guardrails for how we draft. And I've learned from you where the money goes and all that kind of stuff, right? This is not a feel organization. This is a analytic based on numbers organization. I don't think those kind of guys, I don't like those kind of guys all the time. I like to use feel with the numbers as an assist kind of thing. So that would worry me about Tommy Rees. Is that the kind of guy they're going to bring in? Because if they're going to bring a guy like Jim Schwartz or Flores or one of these guys, John Harbaugh, these are alpha guys who are not going to say they're going to be in charge of everything. And that's going to be a different thing if that happens.
All right, I'll wrap up before we get to our draft here. How far would you go to get John Harbaugh in the Browns building? Because I would go pretty far, Lance. I would give him a lot of what he wanted, even if that meant changing my plan from where it was on Monday.
Well, yeah, that's what it's going to have to be. So you bring in a guy like John Harbaugh. I'm going to, for example, John Harbaugh is a football guy. The Harbaughs are football people. And that means numbers are used to help, but there's also feel. Who's hot? You go back to the 2-point play, right? So the 2-point play when they scored the first touchdown and they went for 2 because analytics told them. That wouldn't have happened with Jim Harbaugh. I really don't think so. I think just because of the nature of the game. And then at the end, even though the numbers say that Monday we have this off of our Wildcat, he's going to say, Sanders and Fannin are piping hot right now. Call it what you want, but I want those 2 to get the ball. Then you talk about guardrails when they're drafting. Talk about Baltimore and Pittsburgh, guys that they fit their mentality. It's not always about measurements and 40 time and wingspan and vert and broad jump and all those kind of things. They find football players, and that's what football guys do. Is they're more based on what they see on film and what they see in person. So I would go a long way for him too, but I would think that would be a major shakeup in how things are kind of managed, because some of the things that go to other people, he will now be in charge of. And I don't know if those kind of guys are coming to Cleveland right now with how it works. And not that how they run it is wrong. It's just how they run it. And I don't know. If I'm a football coach, I want to be in charge of what guys are on the field. I don't care what level of football it is. I don't care what anybody tells me. Those guys, there has to be a level of, you saw Sean McVay when he was pushing for Puka Nacua. He had the final kind of push there. So that's important. And I don't really see that in Cleveland right now. And maybe they need to make that change, but I'm not sure how that would work at this point. But I do a lot for him too. I think he's pretty fantastic.
All right, let's get to it. What's our draft this week?
All right, our draft is, really kind of end the season. We're going to go top storylines, disappointments, surprises, just like storylines that pop out. Obviously, throughout the league, Browns, however you want. But like, what are some of the things that kind of, even if it's not a storyline, like kind of made you go, yeah, that's something that's interesting right now. And I got one that's going to be off the rails a little bit, but what would it be a draft without me going off the rails a little bit?
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so am I going number one here then?
You're going number one, my friend.
Okay, I think the biggest storyline of this season, coming out of the season, is the end of whatever this Chiefs era is.
Oh, okay.
That this is the team that has been in the AFC Championship game every single year since Patrick Mahomes took over as the starter. This is the league's most recent dynasty. Obviously, they didn't win the Super Bowl last year, but they have been the most successful franchise in the NFL since Patrick Mahomes took over as the starter. Mahomes is hurt now. They didn't make the playoffs. I'm not saying the Chiefs are done because they have Patrick Mahomes. So no, they're not done, but they've got to reset a little bit. So to me, that's the number one storyline, is the end of whatever this Chiefs era since Mahomes took over, whatever we want to call it.
Mine's a little bit different, and I'm going to go with my number one pick as being my like one out of left field, but I think you'll agree coming from me. The idea of analytics versus feel has hit an all-time crossing roads right now, right? And it's kind of like when you watch teams like running more power and running more counter and more tight ends in the game, more traditional sets. There's a big power kind of struggle of, are we going to trust numbers completely? Or are we going back to like, we're giving Henry the ball 30 times because he's Derrick Henry? So for me, just watching each and every week and seeing different schemes and getting to watch as much film as I can, it's really kind of interesting when you see teams who are based on feel and based on numbers and analytics. And for me, I'm interested to see where it goes in the next couple of years. But to me, that's my biggest storyline, even though people are like, that's only Lance's storyline. But that's my storyline that I really watch.
I like it.
I'm an individual thinker, Dan. I do my...
Yeah. That's good. Okay, I'm going to go with this one. The old adage in football that I don't know it necessarily is always true. In all sports, this is the old adage. Defense wins championships. This year, that might be the case. Defense might be the thing that wins championships this year. You kind of look at the league and some of these teams that have been really good, right? Denver, great defense. Houston, maybe the best defense in football. Seattle, the number one seed in the NFC, one of the best defenses in football. It's not every team. I think the Rams have when they're healthy and they're right, I think they have a great defense. Green Bay at the start of the year before injuries kind of started to catch up with them, they started off with a great defense. I think this has been sort of the year of great defenses. Not everybody that's in there has a great defense, but I feel like there's a lot of people that have kind of have the Houston Texans circled to make the Super Bowl this year, in part because that's maybe the best defense in football.
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things that have happened, Dan, with that. And I think that's a great one, is that teams, this RPO and this marrying the run with the pass. So you're getting a lot of these teams that are two things that have happened. First of all, this ability to be a hybrid guy, the Grant Delpit types. So these Grant Delpit types allow you to play man and take away some of these inside routes. Now, the coverages that teams are running, they're kind of running a lot of different coverages where, like with the people running against the Brown, where they're going to rob the dig routes. And so teams have kind of caught up to this. When people talk about what has screwed Tua up this year, for me, it's been they've taken away his first read. Right. And when you make him reset, it's because defense are kind of catching up with the McVays and McDaniels. That's how football works, is that if something's really good, you go with it. And then obviously teams are going to adjust to it. So if you even look at the short motion and things like that, teams are now bumping that anymore to make sure that the right guys stay on the right guys. So, yeah, I agree with you. That's a great one, because they're just, defenses are just they're killer. And I think the Browns had a championship level defense this year, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's some exceptions to the rule in the league this year of the great defenses making the playoffs. The Browns are certainly one of them. What have you got for me here, number two?
I'm gonna go with the resurgence of not the resurgence, but just the brilliance of Mr. Stafford out in LA. He's been absolutely, and I'm gonna kind of do a little bit of kind of like the changing of the guard with the young quarterbacks. Some of the old quarterbacks are kind of getting out. Some of the new quarterbacks are starting to kind of get in there and step up, and you're seeing these old guys, the Rodgers and these guys kind of like bowing out here kind of towards the end here, and these new guys, Drake May and Daniels and Nix and all these guys. But just the brilliance of Stafford in that offense, and just like how awesome he is and how like ageless he is, that's been really impressive to watch on film.
Yeah, that's a good one. So mine mine is quarterback related as well. My last one, and this is Browns related too. Going into this offseason, figure it out at quarterback. And what I mean by that is maybe you're not going to have a top 5 guy, maybe you're not going to have a top 10 guy, but figure out how you can get somebody in that position that you can win some football games with. And so, to your point, you kind of look through some of these quarterbacks that are in the playoffs. Bo Nix has the number 1 seed this year. Trevor Lawrence, number 3 seed in the AFC. Old Aaron Rodgers somehow sneaks into the playoffs, right? I still think CJ Stroud is really good, but he's been a little up and down since that rookie year. But Houston stuck with him and figured it out. Sam Darnold is leading the number 1 seed. The Eagles and Jalen Hurts are the ultimate figure it out at quarterback football team, right? Maybe he's not perfect. Maybe he isn't a top 10 guy. I don't know, but they figure out how to win football games. San Francisco, Brock Purdy was out. Mac Jones went 5-3 for the 49ers. Cleveland Browns, take note of that when you head into this offseason. If Mac Jones is available in a trade, we'll talk about that maybe at some point, but man, figure it out. Whoever it is, whether it's a veteran guy like a Mac Jones, or maybe you have a chance to bring in Malik Willis, or, Indianapolis was trending towards making the playoffs until Daniel Jones got hurt. Figure it out. Whoever it is, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a top 5 or 10 guy. Bring somebody in and figure it out.
Well, you know what? And it's kind of like, I think you and I have said this before, right? The quarterbacks I think the Browns have to kind of get away. If you fall into that, great. But go with quarterbacks you can win with, not because of. The win with because of guys are really hard to find in the NFL right now. These defenses are playing at a high level, but there's lots of guys you can win with. And I think the Browns have, they were striving to get a guy you can win because of. And I just don't know if you look for that, if you could find it. But I think that's a great call. If you get the right pieces around guys and guys within your system and guys you trust, it can work. As you said, Aaron Rodgers and Bo Nix, these are not guys you win because of. These are guys you win with.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Rodgers 10 years ago, sure. Aaron Rodgers in 2025,
yeah, he's okay.
I think we've seen that. He's not the same guy.
No,
but
he's okay, but yeah, I'm with you.
Bring him in and figure it out, man. Okay, last one.
Last one for me is this builds from last year to this year, but I'm going to go with, it's kind of an overlapping thing, but I'm going to use one in particular. They have to figure something out with these injuries. There has to be something done with these injuries, especially these Achilles injuries, these soft tissue injuries. And for me, I think these guys have to sit down. When you watch beginning of the year, these teams look so different. And you and I get an opportunity to go see every training camp practice, and we don't see the Browns go down. I mean, we saw it a little bit this year, but really the guys get tackled for the first time in week 1. That's got to change. I think that has so much to do with these injuries. And because all of a sudden you've practiced for 4 months, but you haven't gone 100 miles per hour. And then all of a sudden your big, strong body goes 100 miles per hour, and you're getting these Achilles and these knees and soft tissue issues and all these things that it just seems to be more prevalent now in the NFL. So the one of the storylines to me is that how are they going to address getting back to some physicality in the preseason, so they can not have injuries, and it's going to be tougher. They're going to play 18 games, but that's one of the things that stuck out to me. And once again, that might just be my storyline, but that to me, too many quarterbacks out, Lamar Jackson and Burrow, too many guys out all the time, backs and running backs and tight ends, and too many guys out for me right now in the NFL for the amount of money they're making and the amount of they got to be some acclimation, and I'm not sure how they do it, but there's got to be some of that at some point.
Yeah, that's always a tough one, right? Because as we know, football, they always say it's 100% injury rate. You're going to get hurt at some point, but there has to be a way to I'm with you. These guys, nobody tackles in training camp anymore. I mean, the Browns did one live period. It was just one, but I don't think there's any teams that tackle. Yeah.
It was 8 plays, but the Browns don't even really go live in inside run, or they don't, they stay up in one-on-one receiver drills. They do a good job of protecting each other. And I understand that. And that's what you have to do against each other. There's just got to be there's got to be an ability to acclimate. You got to be able to play a little bit live every single day. Because once again, that's hard though. As my dad said before he passed away, 40 years ago, these were 210-pound guys running around and hitting each other. These are 300-pound guys running faster than those 210-pound guys. That's a lot of mass. That's a lot of whatever that mass is, whatever big guy running into big guy does not work out very well for the human body.
Yeah, and well, look, there's something to be said. You don't ever want to see anybody get hurt, right? You don't ever want to see anybody's season end due to injury. But it's a whole lot easier when that happens in like a football game in week 4 than, like I think about LaCharles Bentley, right?
Mm-hmm.
You sign LaCharles Bentley and he's lost on the first play of training camp.
Yeah.
Like it's bad either way, but man, it's really bad when you lose a guy in a practice or a training camp setting. And that's what these coaches and sports science guys, they're all trying to figure this stuff out. Like, how do you protect guys, but also get them ready to play the most violent game we've got?
Well, and it's the size and speed of these guys. I've tell everybody, and with me and all my friends and people I grew up with and my college teammates, I just love football, and I've been on the sidelines for thousands and thousands of games. There is nothing quite. I was telling a couple of my buddies I played with, there is nothing quite like when you go down to a Browns practice and you watch like the offense and defensive line going against each other. My thought process, and I've been around football for almost 50 years now, how do these guys not get hurt almost every play? They're so big, fast, and strong. And, from somebody who, I played college football and played Division I football, these are just such big, fast guys. It's like, it's hard to imagine not getting hurt all the time. They get hurt. They do get hurt, but they're lucky they don't get hurt more. When you're standing next to these humans, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a big guy right here.
There was a play, this was way back, like David Njoku's early years. He caught a pass and was coming down the sideline, and I happened to be like on that sideline, and he like ran by me, and I'm like, how does anybody tackle that guy?
Yeah, how's he go down?
How does anybody he was like full speed. This was when he was in like the best shape he'd ever been in. Like, how does anybody tackle that guy? And people do it all the time, and somehow they get up and they do it again on the next play, and it's incredible.
Well, so the one day I remember you guys were doing the player interviews, and we're out there before practice, and I usually watch you guys do your work, and I'm getting ready, and I usually try to like just see everybody what they're doing, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden Myles Garrett stands next to me, and I just remember he was coming up next, and the PR guy was there, and he was asking me my name, and I just remember thinking in my brain, I'm talking to him, going, "This guy is so massive. It's how does anybody block this human? Like rarely do I feel like I'm like really, really little. I remember coming home and be like, I told my wife, I'm like, I was talking to Myles today. It's hard to, you can't put into words how big and thick and strong this guy is until you stand next to him. You're like, oh my gosh. So, yeah, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they manage the injuries, but that's something that's got to be addressed. And I think it comes to the off-season training. And I don't know what that answer is, but that's where I would start.
All right. Well, there we go. That will do it for this edition of the Orange Brown Talk podcast. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Our YouTube is Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. If you're not a Football Insider subscriber, of course, as this coaching search goes on, we're texting. We got newsletters going out every day. Cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page to get involved with that. And of course, find us on Instagram and Twitter. Our Instagram's Orange and Brown Talk, and our Twitter is Orange Brown Talk. That was Lance Reisland. You heard from Mary Kay and Ashley earlier. I'm Dan. Thanks for listening, everybody.